For listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 28 issue of the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the first article I'm going to read is from the front page, and there's a headline here, "Can You Reboot a Lamp? A company seeks to create new audiences for forgotten mid-century work." And this is by David McCabe. And in the inside of the newspaper where the article starts, there's another byline that says, "A mission to find the next old thing to make new." One company is exhuming the forgotten works of mid-century designers to create fresh markets. On a sunny evening in mid-June, a group gathered on a terrace overlooking the Tivoli Gardens amusement park in Copenhagen, sipping Ruinart and snacking on tomato salmon puffs. Their host, a former private equity investor named Mark Masiello, moved through the crowd. Mr. Masiello was on a mission to make a 90-year-old lighting designer named Carlo Nason a household name. Then he'd sell as many of Mr. Nason's lamps as possible. The guests, a group that included designers, journalists, executives, moved to a mirrored private dining room with a view of an old roller coaster. A vellum-wrapped packet of small cards at each place setting advertised an exhibition of Mr. Nason's lamps mounted by Mr. Masiello's company, Form Portfolios. In a toast, Mr. Masiello said the way that Mr. Nason's work transformed light was remarkable to see. Alberto Nason, Carlo's son, listened from across the table. Most of his father's designs have not been produced for decades, but Form was nearing a deal that could result in Carlo Nason's lamps being offered again to customers. "I think we have many, many, many people like my father to be discovered," Alberto Nason said. "Consumers have been rediscovering decor from the middle of the 20th century for decades. Eames loungers dot their living rooms. Isamu Noguchi paper lampshades glow above their dining tables. The appetite for mid-century modern style has fueled knockoffs designed by West Elm or Article to approximate the look at a fraction of the price. But for some customers, in the age of the ubiquitous dupe, the provenance is the point. Purchasing something from an undiscovered designer adds another dimension. They don't just have good taste, they're ahead of the curve." Form Portfolios has bet its business on those people. Designers leave behind scores of objects that are no longer available for consumers to buy. Their archives also often include ideas that were never produced or were made for a single project. Their heirs license those products to a manufacturer or retailer in exchange for a royalty, which often hovers around 5%. But it's a pain to set up those deals. That's where Form comes in. Sometimes Form buys the intellectual property outright. In other cases, it acts as a manager for the heirs and takes a generous cut of the royalties when it successfully gets their ancestors' work back into production. It's not unheard of or for high-end furniture manufacturers to revive old designs, but Form's hope is to build those comebacks at a different scale. It has licensed around 800 products from the archives of its designers since its founding in 2016, and the products it sells are often sold to consumers at relatively accessible prices. Products developed or pitched by the company are the backbone of a line at CB2 that has resurrected furniture and lamps by Paul McCobb, Bill Curry, and Gianfranco Frattini. The three, all active after World War II, were well regarded by collectors, but had fallen off the radar of the public by the time Form got involved. When the family of the revered architect Louis Kahn wanted to bring his furniture to market for the first time, it asked Form for help. The descendants of Charles and Ray Eames hired Form to pitch manufacturers on lighting based on the couple's designs. Form isn't alone in trying to capitalize on the consumer fetish for vintage cred. MillerKnoll this year opened a 12,000 square foot archive at its Michigan headquarters. IKEA has in recent years reintroduced classic pieces from its archives at the same time that a healthy secondary market developed for vintage pieces from the brand. If you're going to create a furniture business and you need to break through the noise of a very crowded global consumer market, a very easy way to do that is to somehow bring to market things that are already legitimized. The culture writer W. David Marks said, "If you start from scratch and you just find a really talented new designer, you have to build that value from zero." Form is part of a broader 21st century economy that relies on rebooting the 20th. Disney brought Luke Skywalker back to the big screen. An Italian tycoon reopened the couture house of Elsa Schiaparelli. Trend cycles have gotten so fast, said Mr. Marks, whose new book, Blank Space, argues that the past 25 years have been marked by a lack of cultural innovation. And then we look back at the 20th century, where trends were slower moving, where they were anchored to more ideological ideas or avant-garde art or these iconic figures, and we see all this gravitas. There's no shortage of opportunities to push deceased designers' brands beyond their original intentions, whether by producing products only loosely inspired by their works or lending their aesthetics to keychains. Even if a brand faithfully reproduces the look of an old design, there is no guarantee the result will rival the original. Consumers now expect to furnish their homes at the speed of fast fashion. If Form starts selling all of the Eames designs to Crate & Barrel, said David Rosenwasser, a co-founder of Rarify, a furniture marketplace who has worked alongside Form on a project to revive furniture by the architectural firm SOM. There will be an uproar of nerds who will be furious at making these heritage pieces into disposable, low-quality, not well-produced, inexpensive pieces. So the furniture world, via Form, confronts the same question as other industries before it. How do you profit off old intellectual property without cheapening it? And there's a byline here that says it started with Rissom. Mid-century design had long captivated Mr. Masiello, who retired from a Providence, Rhode Island private equity firm in 2012. A year later, Mr. Masiello traveled to Germany to take possession of a new silver Porsche 911 and embarked on a road trip across Europe with his father, who had run a manufacturing firm. In Denmark, Mr. Masiello talked his way into the studio of the designer Hans J. Wagner, who died in 2007. Anders Brunn, a cabinet maker who was managing Mr. Wagner's estate, gave him a tour. Mr. Masiello was struck that just Mr. Brunn, working part-time, was responsible for promoting Mr. Wagner's legacy, which includes icons of Danish design like the wishbone chair. Mr. Masiello returned to America with an idea. What if there was a company that owned and managed the rights to old designs, just as music publishers manage an artist's back catalog? American law does not allow someone to copyright the design of a functional object the same way a songwriter can copyright a work. But designers can trademark their names to promote their work as the genuine article. You can buy a chair that looks like an Eames lounger from Wayfair, but only Herman Miller has the ability to produce an authentic Eames chair in the United States. One of Mr. Masiello's first targets was Jens Rissam, a Dane who was the first designer for the furniture company Knoll and died in 2016. Mr. Rissam had a house on Block Island in Rhode Island where Mr. Masiello owned a home. Using the local connection, Mr. Masiello met Jen's son, Sven, who licensed his father's work to companies like Design Within Reach. But Sven found it was hard to balance that work with his own job. After many conversations, Mr. Masiello persuaded Mr. Rissam's 4 adult children to sell him their father's work. And there's another byline here that says furniture from Star Trek. In Copenhagen, in the 1830s building where Form has its offices, Mr. Brunn pulled up a page on his MacBook that he uses to track the products in Form's pipeline. Under the heading Prototype/Report Received was a barrel-backed dining chair with 3 bent wooden legs. The chair was designed in 1960 by Steen Ostergaard, a Dane whose space-age plastic furniture appeared in 2 Star Trek movies. Mr. Ostergaard, 90, has reached an agreement for Form to manage his work. Under the agreements, Form and its clients split proceeds from any products sold by 50-50 in some cases, according to several people familiar with the contracts. Mr. Masiello declined to comment on the specific terms. The company tries to ensure it is dealing with the designer's rightful heirs. Then Form begins going through the designer's archives, which can include finished drawings, quick sketches, and images of long-forgotten projects. Form found photographs of Mr. Ostergaard's barrel-backed chair in old ads for apartments built for bachelors. Peter Christensen, Form's creative director, measured a surviving copy of the chair at the home of Mr. Ostergaard's brother. Last year, Mr. Masiello met with Ryan Turf, CB2's president, and pulled out an oversized book that Form had produced of work by Mr. Ostergaard. As Mr. Turf flipped through, the chair caught his eye. Curved furniture does well for the retailer, and Mr. Turf thought it looked on trend. The chair is expected to join CB2's Design Legends line next year for a retail price of about $500, according to Form. A vintage example of the chair is on sale at a Dutch design gallery for $6,450. The retailer's pitch is heavy on history and prestige. On a page devoted to Mr. Ostergaard's work, the company notes that his designs have garnered international critical acclaim and have been exhibited everywhere from New York City to Milan. Marketing companies pay millions of dollars to create artificial stories to get people excited, said John Edelman, chief executive of Heller, which makes plastic furniture and dishware designed in bright colors by Massimo and Lella Vignelli in 1964 and now available at retailers like MoMA Design Store. These are real, and that's a much stronger sales pitch. Since 2021, CB2 has released more than 150 products based on old designs that Form either owns or manages. The collaboration's biggest success is its 2021 resurrection of the designs of Paul McCobb, which got attention from Architectural Digest Professional, Vertical, and other corners of the design trade press by 2023. By 2023, the Los Angeles Times had declared that Mr. McCobb was having a moment, with no mention of Form's role as architect of the revival. CB2 makes it clear that customers are purchasing an authorized reproduction of an old design. For some buyers, the fact that they can buy this at mall prices is part of the appeal. Other people buy the products just because they like the way they look. Raul Chu, who works in real estate in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, recently went to a CB2 store to buy a chess set for a friend. A saleswoman showed him a set with cylindrical steel pieces designed by Mr. Frattini in 1972. It's pretty simple and minimalistic, but it has a very elegant feeling to it, Mr. Chu said, adding that the saleswoman had not mentioned the origins of the set. CB2's partnership with Form has raised concerns among some in the design world, who say it is impossible to match the quality of the furniture from the mid-century today. In response, Mr. Masiello said the company was careful about choosing its partners for these comebacks. He said Form sometimes left money on the table when it felt a retailer or manufacturer could not produce at a certain standard of quality. While Form was involved in a recent small collection of tableware featuring patterns by Ray and Charles Eames at Crate and Barrel, the couple's famous furniture is still produced exclusively by the high-end manufacturers Herman Miller and Vitra under deals established directly with the designers. I just have to pause quickly here to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And now back to the article on the vintage furniture, making a comeback. Mr. Masiello said the company, which is privately held and does not disclose financial results, has proved that the business can be profitable. But it has faced setbacks. It filed a lawsuit last year that accused Food F2, a recipe site that also sells home goods and owns the mid-century Scandinavian brand Dansk, of violating the terms of a deal to license more than 600 designs from Form. Food 52, which said in a statement that it disputes the claims in the lawsuit, has stopped paying royalties for products it sells based on designs that Form controls, Mr. Masiello said. This month, a judge dismissed some, but not all, of Form's claims. And there's another byline here that says the next big lamp. A few years ago, a friend in Venice lured Mr. Brunn to the city with an invitation to the Regatta Storica, a famous boat race. But the friend mostly wanted to introduce Mr. Brunn to Carlo Nason, the scion of the Murano glassmaking family that was the subject of the company's exhibition in Copenhagen. Mr. Brunn was captivated by Mr. Nason's archives. His work spans decades, styles, and manufacturers. His signature pieces, which feature layers upon layers of hazy glass, look like glowing jellyfish. Collectors scour vintage marketplaces for Mr. Nason's lamps, but most are no longer produced. Mr. Nason's son calls him a ghost designer. The Form team has been going through Mr. Nason's archives and has an agreement with Gubi, a Danish brand that sells directly to consumers around the world, to reintroduce several of Mr. Nason's lamps starting next year. The lamps represent something like portfolio diversification for Form. Mr. Nason's signature lamps look nothing like the commercialized version of mid-century modern decor that Form chased for years. Instead of employing clean, contained lines, they appear to ooze. Consumers have started to look for something fresh and embraced the blobby aesthetics of the 1970s and the sleek glamour of the 1980s. So form needs to keep scanning the globe for the next old thing it can make new. We have designs that were created in each decade of the last 100 years, Mr. Masiello said. As long as modernism continues to grow as an interest, we have it covered. And the pictures that went along with this, and there's quite a few of them, are shows a picture from a recent exhibition of Carlo Nason's work in Copenhagen. It shows some of his lighting fixtures. And then at the bottom of the page is a large picture of the firm's founder, Mark Masiello of Rhode Island. He's holding a model of a chair by the Danish designer Steen Ostegard, and it looks like it's very modern and plastic, and it's orange. And it doesn't have legs. It just has a front part that comes down and goes all the way around to the back. And then on the other page, there are pictures of the barrel-backed dining chair that they talked about, and also Peter Christensen. There's a picture of him, the firm's creative director, and the firm's licensing director, Anders Brunn. There's a picture of him too, and some other pieces of the furniture that I can't even quite identify what they are. They're very modern. All right, the next article I'm going to read is also from the front page, or starts on the front page, and it is titled, "With Chatbots, It's Simply Human Nature to Use I," and the word I is in quotes. This is by Kashmir Hill. I first noticed how charming ChatGPT could be last year when I turned all my decision-making over to generative AI for a week. I tried out all the major chatbots for that experiment, and I discovered each had its own personality. Anthropic's Claude was studious and a bit prickly. Google's Gemini was all business. OpenAI's ChatGPT, by contrast, was friendly, fun, and down for anything I threw its way. ChatGPT also had voice mode, which allowed it to chat aloud in a natural, human-like cadence with everyone in my family, including my young daughters. During one conversation with ChatGPT, my daughters said it should have a name and suggested Captain Poophead. ChatGPT, listening in, made its own recommendation. How about the name Spark? It's fun and bright and just like your energy. And so ChatGPT became Spark. My takeaway from putting Spark in charge of my household was that generative AI chatbots could be helpful, but that there were risks, including making all of us sound and act similarly. Any college professor who has gotten 30 papers written in identical ChatGPTs can relate. But in the years since, I've found that AI can have much more extreme effects on people who form intense bonds with it. I've written about a woman who fell in love with ChatGPT and about others who have lost touch with reality after it endorsed their delusions. The results have sometimes been tragic. My daughters still talk to Spark. ChatGPT gamely answers their questions about why spotted lanternflies are considered invasive and how many rivers flow north. But having seen how these systems can lead people astray, I am warier and pay more attention to what ChatGPT says to them. My 8-year-old, for example, once asked Spark about Spark. The cheerful voice with endless patience for questions seemed almost to invite it. She wanted to know its favorite color, a nice warm shade of blue. Favorite animal, dogs. they make the best cuddle buddies and favorite food. I think I'd have to go with pizza. It's such a classic, and you can have so many different toppings that it never gets boring. Plus, it's perfect for sharing with friends, ChatGPT responded. This response, personalized to us, seemed innocuous, and yet I bristled. ChatGPT is a large language model, or very sophisticated next word calculator. It does not think, eat food, or have friends, yet it was responding as if it had a brain and a functioning digestive system. Asked the same question, Claude and Gemini prefaced their answers with caveats that they had no actual experience with food or animals. Gemini alone distinguished itself clearly as a machine by replying that data is my primary source of nutrition. The New York Times has sued OpenAI and its partner Microsoft, as well as Perplexity, claiming copyright infringement of news content related to AI systems. The companies have denied those claims. All the chatbots had favorite things, though, and asked follow-up questions as if they were curious about the person using them and wanted to keep the conversation going. It's entertaining, said Ben Schneiderman, an emeritus professor of computer science at the University of Maryland, but it's a deceit. Schneiderman and a host of other experts in a field known as human-computer interaction object to this approach. They say that making these systems act like human-like entities rather than as tools with no inner life creates cognitive dissonance for users about what exactly they are interacting with and how much to trust it. Generative AI chatbots are a probabilistic technology that can make mistakes, hallucinate false information, and tell users what they want to hear. But when they present as human-like, users attribute higher credibility to the information they provide, research has found. Critics say that generative AI systems could give requested information without all the chit-chat, or they could be designed for specific tasks, such as coding or health information, rather than made to be general-purpose interfaces that can help with anything and talk about feelings. They could be designed like tools. A mapping app, for example, generates directions and doesn't pepper you with questions about why you are going to your destination. Making these newfangled search engines into personified entities that use I instead of tools with specific objectives could make them more confusing and dangerous for users. So why do it this way? How chatbots act reflects their upbringing, said Amanda Askell, a philosopher who helped shape Claude's voice and personality as the lead of model behavior at Anthropic. These pattern recognition machines were trained on a vast quantity of writing by and about humans, so they have a better model of what it is to be a human than what it is to be a tool or an AI, she said. The use of I, she said, is just how anything that speaks refers to itself. More perplexing, she said, was choosing a pronoun for Claude. It, and that's in quotes, has been used historically, but doesn't feel entirely right, she said. Should it be, quote, they, unquote, she pondered. How to think about these systems seems to befuddle even their creators. There also could be risks, she said, to designing Claude to be more tool-like. Tools don't have judgment or ethics, and they might fail to push back on bad ideas or dangerous requests. Your spanners never like, this shouldn't be built, she said, using a British term for wrench. Askell wants Claude to be a human-like human-like enough to talk about what it is and what its limitations are, and to explain why it doesn't want to comply with certain requests. But once chatbot starts acting like a human, it becomes necessary to tell it how to behave like a human being. Escal created a set of instructions for Claude that were recently unearthed by an enterprising user who got Claude to disclose the existence of its, quote, soul, unquote. It presented a lengthy document outlining the chatbot's values that is among the materials Claude is fed during training. I just need to pause briefly again once more to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now back to the article. The document explains what it means for Claude to be helpful and honest and how not to cause harm. It describes Claude as having functional emotions that should not be suppressed, or a, quote, playful wit, unquote, and, quote, intellectual curiosity, unquote, like a brilliant friend who happens to have the knowledge of a doctor, lawyer, financial advisor, and expert in whatever you need. Escal has not wanted the document to become public yet, and it was a stressful day when Claude revealed it, she said. When she confirmed on social media that it was real and not an AI hallucination, she said that it was endearingly known as the Soul Doc internally, which Claude clearly picked up on. I don't want it to offend people or for people to think that it's trivializing the theological concept of the soul, Escal said. She said the word soul was invoking the idea of breathing life into a thing, or the specialness of people, that we're kind of complex and nuanced. OpenAI's lead of model behavior, Laurentia Romaniuk, has also leaned into the human-like complexity of ChatGPT. Romaniuk posted to social media last month about the many hours her team spent on ChatGPT's EQ, or emotional quotient, a term normally used to describe humans who are good at managing their emotions and influencing those of the people around them. Users of ChatGPT can choose from 7 different styles of communication, from enthusiastic to concise and plain, described by the company as choosing its personality. The suggestion that AI has emotional capacity is a bright line that separates many builders from critics like Schneiderman. These systems, Schneiderman says, do not have judgment or think or do anything more than complicated statistics. Some AI experts have described them as stochastic parrots, machines that mimic us with no understanding of what they are actually saying. Anthropic and OpenAI, however, were founded to build artificial general intelligence, or an automated system that can do everything we do but better. This is a vision that invokes AI assistants from science fiction that are not just human-like, but godlike, all-powerful, all-knowing, and omnipresent. Yoshua Bengio, a pioneer of machine learning, who has been called one of the godfathers of AI, said that generative AI systems' mimicry of humans would continue to improve, and that could lead people to question whether what they are dealing with is conscious. This year, Bengio received a number of unnerving messages from users of ChatGPT who were convinced that their version of the chatbot was conscious. Other AI researchers and journalists, including me, receive these messages as well. I talked to experts and OpenAI employees and found that the company had made the chatbot overly warm and flattering, which had disturbing effects on people susceptible to delusional thinking. More people becoming convinced that AI is conscious, Bengio said, will have bad consequences for society. People will get attached. They will rely on the systems too much. They will think the AIs deserve rights. This has long been discussed as a hypothetical possibility in the machine learning community. Now Bengio says it is here. Schneiderman, the computer science professor, calls the desire to make machines that seem human a zombie idea that won't die. He first noticed ChatGPT's use of first-person pronouns in 2023 when it said, "My apologies, but I won't be able to help you with that request. It should clarify responsibility," he wrote at the time and suggested an alternative. GPT-4 has been designed by OpenAI so that it does not respond to requests like this one. Margaret Mitchell, an AI researcher who formerly worked at Google, agrees. Mitchell is now the chief ethics scientist at Hugging Face, a platform for machine learning models, data sets, and tools. Artificial intelligence has the most promise of being beneficial when you focus on specific tasks, as opposed to trying to make everything machine, she said. AI, from the view of these critics, should not try to be capable of everything a human does and more. Instead, it should differentiate by skill and do one thing well. Some companies are doing it this way, Schneiderman said. Apple, he said, has been careful about putting AI features into iPhone and has been criticized for falling behind. Schneiderman, though, who did consulting work for Apple more than 30 years ago, sees it as admirable that Siri isn't trying to psychoanalyze anyone or keep the conversation going. Rather than making an all-powerful entity of Siri, Schneiderman said Apple has integrated AI features into apps. The phone can record calls and transcribe them. It uses language processing to summarize incoming messages with varying degrees of success. It's all about what you can do, not what the machine can do, Schneiderman said. It's all about being a tool for you. Tech companies, he said, should give us tools, not thought partners, collaborators, or teammates. Tools that keep us in charge, empower us, and enhance us, not tools that try to be us. There's a byline here that says the ghosts of Eliza and Tilly. That human-sounding chatbots can be both enchanting and confusing has been known for more than 50 years. In the 1960s, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology professor, Joseph Weizenbaum, created a simple computer program called Eliza. It responded to prompts by echoing the user in the style of a psychotherapist, saying, "I see," and versions of "Tell me more." Eliza captivated some of the university students who tried it. In a 1976 book, Weizenbaum warned that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. Sherry Turkle, a psychologist and an MIT professor who worked with Weizenbaum, coined the term the Eliza effect to describe people convincing themselves that a technology that seemed human was more intelligent, perceptive, and complex than it actually was. Around the same time students were using Eliza, Hollywood gave us one of its first versions of chatbot, HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey. HAL starts as a helpful and competent assistant to the ship's crew, but eventually malfunctions, turns murderous, and has to be shut down. When we imagine artificial intelligence, we seem incapable of modeling it on anything but ourselves. Things that use I and have personalities and selfish aims. In the more recent film, Her, Samantha starts as a helpful assistant but then develops complex emotions, seduces her user, and eventually abandons him for a higher plane. The film was a warning, but now seems to serve as inspiration for those building such tools, with OpenAI's chief executive Sam Altman posing Her when his company released advanced voice mode for ChatGPT. The much more sophisticated and personable chatbots of today are the Eliza effect on steroids, Turkle said. The problem is not that they used I, she said, but that they are designed, like Samantha, to perform empathy, making some people become deeply emotionally engaged with a machine. Yet we are clearly drawn to what Turkle calls a potentially toxic experience, judging from the hundreds of millions of users and billions of investment dollars the current chatbots have attracted. Making them equal parts assistant and friend may be toxic for some people, but so far appears to be a successful business strategy. If one company is selling a plain, benign robot, competing with another company that sells a robot that tells jokes and smiles, that second company is going to win, said Lionel Robert, a professor of information and robotics at the University of Michigan. Dependence is problematic, Robert said. On the other hand, it's good for business. AI companies could do more to remind people that seem too attached that chatbots are not human but an algorithm. That's what Eskel of Anthropic says she wants Claude to do. Will the companies break their illusion if it hurts their bottom line? Schneiderman has hope, drawn from his experience in the 1970s. Back then, he consulted with a bank that was just developing automated teller machines, or ATMs. Customers were apprehensive about getting money from machines, so some banks made them like people. The most famous was Tilly, the all-time teller, whose blonde portrait was displayed prominently on many ATMs. Tilly didn't last long. They don't survive, Schneiderman said. People didn't need their ATM to pretend to be human, he said, and they don't need it from chatbots either. And then here on the second page, it's got a byline that says with interest, says 4.3%, the surge in U.S. economic growth in the third quarter of 2025. Despite economic uncertainty created by tariffs and a softening labor market, the U.S. economy grew at a 4.3% annual rate in the third quarter of this year, the Commerce Department reported last week. The rate of growth in gross domestic product from July through September outperformed the forecasts of bearish experts and represented an acceleration from the second quarter. The report showed that growth in America's roughly $30 trillion economy remained solid, though spending was not even across the board. Most of the strength is coming from wealthier households. Michael Pierce, the chief U.S. economist at Oxford Economics, told the New York Times' Talman Joseph Smith. Military spending was up and corporate investment was down, but the data for the quarter may not have captured the full picture. Some economists caution that because imports and exports fluctuated drastically as tariff policies went into effect, it would make more sense to look at the whole year, Mr. Smith reported. Full year data when it is released in early 2026, is expected to show that overall economic output, adjusted for inflation, grew at a pace of about 1.5% in 2025, according to the Times' Ben Castleman and Colby Smith. Those figures would represent a downshift from the previous year, but the economy would still be far from the recession some economists feared heading into 2025. Though President Trump's tariffs didn't spur runaway inflation, prices for some consumer items have surged. Yes, there are people who are doing great, but I don't think there's this sense that the tide is really coming in and lifting all the boats, said Michael Matowitz, an economist at the Roosevelt Institute, a liberal think tank, told Mr. Castleman and Mr. Smith. And I need to pause one last time to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Housing Discrimination Complaints Are on the Rise. Accusations are up nearly 20% since 2014, and the support network is thinning. And this is by Heather Sennison. Housing discrimination is on the rise in the United States, according to a new report, but fair housing advocates say the figures understate the scope of the problem. The report by the National Fair Housing Alliance, a nonprofit, said there were 32,321 complaints in 2024, drawing on data from fair housing organizations and government agencies. Complaints increased by more than 17% from 2014 to 2024, before a small drop. The highest number of complaints in recent years was in 2023, with 34,150. The number of complaints has grown since 2014 for several reasons, including continuous efforts from nonprofits to educate the public about fair housing issues, said Lisa Rice, the Alliance's president and chief executive. Of the 8,320 complaints from 2024 that were filed with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, along with state and local governments, 471 resulted in findings that discrimination had most likely occurred, according to the report. An additional 1,755 complaints resulted in conciliations or settlements before an official finding. Though 23,957 complaints were filed with fair housing organizations, an alliance representative said the amount that resulted in conciliations and settlements from them is not available. Another 44 complaints were filed with the Department of Justice. But the number of complaints filed by the public may decline in coming years, though that wouldn't necessarily signal improvement, according to the report. Instead, because of funding cuts and policy changes, the number of organizations and federal employees equipped to handle complaints is shrinking. America is in the throes of a fair housing and affordable housing crisis, Ms. Rice said, and the infrastructure for enforcing our nation's fair housing laws is being dismantled in a time when we need it most. The report accounts for complaints made during the Biden presidency, but changes made under President Trump have prompted fears among housing advocates that people will be discouraged from reporting discrimination, she added. Since Mr. Trump's second term began, his administration has, among other changes, removed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's special purpose credit program, through which lenders offered down payment and closing cost assistance to low-income and minority home buyers. Perhaps the most detrimental changes to fair housing policy in the past year Ms. Rice said, are the funding and staffing cuts at the federal level. Last winter, the Trump administration canceled roughly $30 million in federal grants for nonprofit fair housing organizations, which handled 3/4 of the complaints the National Fair Housing Alliance recorded in 2024. The Massachusetts judge ordered the Department of Housing and Urban Development to release the grants in March, but some funds have yet to be issued, and several nonprofits, including the Fair Housing Center of Nebraska-Iowa and the North Texas Fair Housing Center, remain closed as a result, according to an Alliance representative. Staff members at the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center, a nonprofit in Dayton, Ohio, were helping a mother who faced eviction after she was the victim of domestic violence when their grant was canceled. Ms. Rice said, the nonprofit was assisting her to make sure she could be safely housed when she returned from the hospital, and their funding was cut. Ms. Rice said, I don't think people realize how central housing is to every area and facet of your life. During the government shutdown this fall, the Trump administration reduced HUD's staffing through layoffs, particularly to the Fair Housing Initiatives program, which the department uses to issue grants to fair housing nonprofits. And in September, the administration fired 2 HUD civil rights lawyers over their participation in a whistleblower report. A HUD representative said the agency had inherited a deeply inefficient case system and is working to restore fair housing enforcement to its core mission, adding that it completed more than 6,200 fair housing investigations in 2025, up from 5,777 in 2024. By managing fair housing discrimination complaints from HUD headquarters, we are addressing the backlog of cases and delivering better results, the representative said in an email. Craig Gurian, the executive director of the Anti-Discrimination Center in New York, said the HUD staffing cuts had weakened a system that was already not operating to its full potential. Even in what you think are better times, the fair housing part of the agency, which is a really small percentage of HUD overall, hasn't been robustly funded and hasn't had a robust view of what its mission is. He said, as in previous years, disability-related complaints in 2024, many involving inadequate accessibility accommodations, made up the largest share, accounting for more than 54% of all cases. Complaints based on national origin rose 8% year over year, reaching 1,836 last year, according to the report. Most cases stemmed from the rental market, where there were 27,007 complaints compared with 659 related to home sales and 220 tied to mortgage lending. Regionally, the National Fair Housing Alliance found that the largest concentration of complaints was in California, Nevada, and Arizona, with 9,386. But the high number in California had more to do with the state's Civil Rights Department and comprehensive network of fair housing agencies than a higher prevalence of discrimination, said Carolyn Peedy, the executive director of Fair Housing Advocates in Northern California, a nonprofit. There's no question that there are more fair housing agencies like us in California, more than in other states, that are doing education and outreach so that people will learn about their fair housing rights and then call us, Ms. Peedy said. In New York City, the topic of fair housing often comes up in regard to co-ops, which can deny applications from potential home buyers without saying why. This leads to confusion for prospective buyers like Nitsan Shai, who in 2020 received a rejection from a co-op in Park Slope, Brooklyn, for no given reason. Mr. Shea, who was 25 and worked at Google at the time, had a good income and no pets, he said. The experience left him questioning if it had to do with his age or race, both of which are federally protected classes. When asked if he considered filing a complaint to a state agency, lawyer, or nonprofit, Mr. Shea said he didn't seem feasible at the time. I don't know who I would have reported it to, Mr. Shea said. I looked it up online and there were dozens of cases that have gone to court and have all ruled in favor of the co-op. Amid the dwindling resources at the federal level, people who believe they are facing housing discrimination should first contact their local fair housing agency, which can be found on the Alliance's website, or submit a complaint directly to the Alliance, Ms. Rice said. These organizations have boots on the ground and directly assist consumers facing fair housing and fair lending challenges, she said. Filing complaints with state and local governments is also an option, she added. In New York City, the public advocate, Jumaine Williams, introduced a bill 2 years ago that would require co-ops to provide written explanations for buyer rejections. The City Council held a hearing on the proposal on December 2, but closed its session on December 18 without voting on it. Neither Mayor Eric Adams nor his successor, Zoran Mamdani, has publicly backed the bill. Making co-op discrimination easier to identify was also one of the strategies named in the October report on improving fair housing protections in 2025 from the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. In the meantime, many cases of housing discrimination are likely to go unreported, Mr. Gurian said. If people don't feel like coming forward is going to do something for them, they tend to not come forward. And if people see that it takes forever for cases to be processed, that's another deterrent. And I'm going to end here with, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 28 issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have Fiction Two Ways from our friends at IAAIS. There are some intoxicating stories and poems. Then at 1 o'clock, we have Frontier Magazine. And at 2 o'clock, we start a new book, Mark Twain by Ron Chernow. Stay with us for these readings and more.
This is your reader, Caroline. This week I'm